Good afternoon, everybody, at least those who are present today. Today we will discuss about memory. I think it's important because it's a topic that is often overlooked. Who complain that the students don't remember anything, and students who complain about the difficulty, and it seems that nobody is really trying to address the problem. So today we will try to give some techniques to improve memory, but before that we need to understand how important memory is. So you know Bloom's taxonomy already, you are very familiar with it. So I just want you to take a look at those two charts. They look very different. And tell me which chart you consider the best.
I think the second one, right, on the right side.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain?
Because from the far distance, you can see in terms of chronological order levels.
In terms of chronological order.
And also.
Okay, that's one interpretation.
The letter, the big letter, you can say.
Well, but that's just a problem of layout.
Yes.
But you mean chronological order? Okay.
I don't think so.
Why? That's interesting. If you disagree.
There are the variation. We call variation listed learner. Individual may be able to do a certain thing differently. Example, some people may begin with applying rather than remembering. So if it is a linear, the revised Bloom taxonomy is a linear, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 3, step 4. When we want to go to step 3, we need to first go with step 1 first. So that is unreal.
I understand you want to explain about the concept, right? But the question from Stanislas, the picture that you can see, which one is which one?
That's why I said the revive is not necessary to be better.
It's not necessary, but yeah.
That's the short answer.
And if you think about it, you consider it as a chronological order. Well, not really. Can you memorize something that you don't understand?
No.
So, in a chronological order, you will understand first before you remember. Or even if you apply a constructivist approach, you might make the student analyze the situation, extract some principles that they will have to understand. Like you do an experiment, you give some data to analyze to the students, they analyze first. And then you will explain the general rule, the laws of motion from the experiment. So they will really understand in the second stage. And then at the end of the lesson, you will ask them to remember the law of motion. So it's not necessarily a chronological order. You might argue maybe that it's an order of complexity. Remembering, in principle, it's simpler than understanding and so on. But saying that you understand first, it's not entirely true either. Because what do you need in order to understand?
So in short, we do not think that the Bloom taxonomy should be in the chronological order.
It's not a chronological order. It's much more complex than that. And you cannot really put a chronological order on those different levels. Because you go back and forth between memory, understanding, and maybe the other ones as well. This chart tries to avoid making a hierarchy between the different levels, but this one can be a little bit misleading as well, because it's not a cycle either. So you need to be careful and remember that all the orders of thinkings are necessary. And you cannot dismiss one, because you need memory in order to do other things, and you need understanding in order to memorize, and so on and so on. So it's much more complicated than what we can have with Bloom's taxonomy. I mentioned Bloom's taxonomy because I think we need to be careful when we teach Bloom's taxonomy. We should not create, misinterpretations that might make teachers worse instead of better. Just have fun. Do you want your surgeon to wear this t-shirt? Imagination is more important than knowledge. Einstein.
How about you, Stan?
Would you like that? Yeah, you all have the answer.
Yeah. Well, I would be quite afraid if the surgeon relied on his imagination rather than on strong knowledge, of course. And by the way, this citation is probably false. On the internet they say Einstein said all sorts of things. It's probably not from Einstein. Anyway. So, we should not oppose creativity and memory. We need to be very careful about how we train teachers, because we want to insist and encourage creativity, but we should not forget memory in the process, because you need memory in order to be creative. The different orders of thinking support each other. You cannot have one without the others. If you want to be convinced about it, let's take some famous writers. You have heard about J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter. Do you think J.K. Rowling has a lot of creativity?
Yeah, why not? Because she wrote about Harry Potter, and in which most people have never imagined about that before.
Well, if you are familiar with literature and you know the history of literature, you can identify all the elements of Harry Potter somewhere else in the literature. All those fantastic beasts and characters that she has imagined. In fact, she didn't invent those characters.
She just adapted both roles.
She just adapted from existing mythologies, and you can check the sources of Rowling, and it's not very difficult.
She's creative enough to be able to adapt, right?
Yeah, she's creative enough to adapt it, but she couldn't do anything without prior knowledge and without a huge culture. It's because she has a lot of knowledge that she is able to create something. And you can take any famous fantasy writer, it's always the same. If you take Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, the Ring of Power, it's taken from Greek mythology and from Germanic mythology. Elves, are taken from Nordic mythology. You can trace most of the elements of the Lord of the Rings to something very, very clear in the literature. Even the languages that he has created from existing languages. So, no opposition. It's very important. Why am I saying that? Because when you try to make students write something creative, write a story, some students are totally stuck. They don't dare to write anything at all. Because they believe that they have to be creative, to make something original, and they don't even dare to use the knowledge that they have.
Yeah, right.
And they do nothing at all.
From initiating.
So there is a risk that you will block your students if you make that false opposition. So my next question is, what should we memorize and why we should memorize things? Because obviously we cannot ask the students to memorize everything in a lesson. That would be too much. So we have to select. But before I explain how to select, I will...
You want a speaker?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I don't need the speaker, in fact. Because it's just an experiment. Maybe you already know it, but try to do it anyway. So, you try to do it. Pay attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. Okay? At the end, we will check who is right. Dr. Chanrod, you do the experiment with us? You count how many times the white players pass the basketball. Simple? Okay, let's see if you can do it.
We count.
Yeah, the white player when they pass the ball.
Oh, only white player.
Yeah, only white player.
Oh. Rồi bọc nó còn làm đong chứ này.
16. 16.
Sorry, how many?
14.
Samara, how many?
I count only 12.
Only 12?
I about 12.
12.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the beginning I a little bit broke.
So, it's a kind of tricky experiment because in fact it's not at all about that. Did you notice something weird on the video? Did you see the gorilla?
Yes.
Yeah, because you know...
One, so the black one. Yes, the black one. Come in the process of throwing the ball.
Did you see that guy with the gorilla suit?
Yeah. But I didn't really notice. I only focused on the ball.
Yeah. Well, it's normal. It's perfectly normal if you didn't notice it at first. And normally, if you are really focused on counting the passes, it's almost impossible to see the gorilla. Maybe you saw it. Did you see the gorilla?
Of course.
The
That's why I
first
count
time?
12.
Yeah, because
He got distracted.
but he was distracted by the gorilla,
Yeah.
so he couldn't get both. He couldn't get at the same time the correct number of passes and the gorilla. This experiment shows one very simple thing. You cannot divide your attention. It's impossible to multitask, to do two demanding cognitive tasks at the same time. Impossible. You can try, there are many experiments if you want to check again, but it's simply not possible. There are lots and lots of experiments that you can redo, and you will see every time you are trying to do two things at the same time, you will have a loss in performance. Always.
I still wonder about the capacity of women and men when they are doing two things at the same time. For example, cooking and have attention and the children playing. So the women seem to be better than men. What do you think?
What I think about it, what happens, in fact, is that you can shift from one task to another. But each time you have to shift, there is a small lag between the tasks. And the more tasks you have, are trying to do at the same time, the bigger the lag is. It has been measured by many, many experiments. You don't need to trust me. You can redo the experiment. If you want, I can share other links with you. So first, there is this shift. You can shift from one to another. And one thing also is that some tasks, you have automatized some tasks. Like looking at children, normally it doesn't require your attention. You do it without thinking. You don't need to think when you monitor the children. Unless the children are doing something bad. And what happens if the children are doing something bad? You have to drop your utensils. You can no longer focus on your food, and you will burn your meal because you are distracted by the children. And the same when you have a conversation in a car. You are driving the car, you have a conversation, everything is fine. Unless there is a danger on the road. And when there is a danger on the road, all your attention shifts to the road, normally, or you are dead. And you don't even hear what the others are saying to you.
So
Next time.
When the driver driving while we are talking on the phones, the driver doesn't pay attention.
Doesn't pay enough attention, yeah.
So when the
It's
action comes, they start to pay attention.
Yeah, and maybe it's too late. And everything depends on how fast you shift your attention to the road.
But I still think he's still having
You have never had that experience that when something is happening, you don't hear what other people are saying to you. Suddenly, you cannot hear them anymore. Bang, you have shifted your attention to something else. Just pay attention in your daily life, you will find the examples, I'm pretty sure. What are the consequences for teaching when we consider that attention cannot be divided? In fact, there are lots and lots of problems with attention, trying to do two things at the same time. What happens is what we call a cognitive overload. There are too many things coming to your mind at the same time. And it happens very fast. I mean, two tasks are enough to put you in cognitive overload. So how comes that we are still able to do complicated things like reading, while we can be fooled by a very, very simple task? Counting the passes? That's so easy. And still it's enough to make you unaware of the gorilla. Or the gorilla is enough to make you lose your attention and not be able to just count from 1 to 15. In order to do complex tasks, you need to master the elements of the task. You can read a text because you have memorized the letters perfectly. You recognize the words immediately without thinking. You have automatized the task. And when it's automatized, you can do pretty complicated things, in fact. Reading are already very complex tasks. It takes 1 year to learn how to read for a child. Because the child needs to memorize all the letters perfectly, and also some words, and also some grammatical structures, a lot of things. And if a reader has not automatized all the elements of reading, it will be extremely difficult to use reading in order to learn something else. And that's why it's very important to memorize some basic knowledge, because when things will become complicated, more complex, you cannot go back and finish learning those simple tasks. The kids are already in a cognitive overload. And they shut down their mind to the new knowledge. That's it. So, what are the basic elements that we absolutely need to learn perfectly, to learn by heart? So, take a few minutes, maybe on a piece of paper or on the computer, to list down a few elements. You choose one subject, math or Khmer or English or history, science, whatever you want. You choose one subject that you like and write the kind of knowledge that students should absolutely memorize in that subject. Take, say, 3 minutes to brainstorm it individually, and let's see what you can find. Dr. Chandra, would you like to do it for math? What sort of knowledge do the students need to learn perfectly, to memorize perfectly in math? According to you.
Some formula.
Repeat.
Mm-hmm.
You need to learn and learn.
What sort of things they absolutely need to learn by heart, perfectly, to memorize?
To memorize, they need to read again and again, or do the exercise.
To memorize perfectly, be able to give the answer immediately without hesitation.
To train.
Mm-hmm.
To memorize perfectly.
Mathematically.
Formula, repetition, repeat.
Yeah, repeat and repeat.
Repeat.
Until
They need to repeat, but what should they repeat?
Like history. History, maybe it's we call linear linear thinking. We order from the old to the latest, the recent history, like all
You
the,
mean
the event.
The chronology,
Yeah, the chronology.
the chronology
order,
of the events,
right, of the event. So
and maybe
that,
some dates to have.
yeah, list some date from the
Mhm.
yeah, the one that is far from the present until the one who is close to the present,
Yeah,
and then try to
probably.
repeat it many times. That thinking in the a linear, we call linear thinking.
Okay, that's a good example in history. What else? So
I think for English should be the authors of the scholars, okay? Author, the
The
names
author?
of the author, the
Names
name
of the author.
yes. Locations should be learned by heart, okay?
do you agree with that? Is it absolutely necessary to know the names of famous authors?
Yes, some part is useful.
And also regular verb 1, 2, 3, verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, like go and gone, okay?
Okay,
Yes.
irregular verbs.
Yeah, regular
Mhm.
verbs.
Why?
And
Why do you need to know the irregular verbs perfectly?
because if they don't know all of them, they cannot use them in speaking based on the tenses that they are using. Right?
They cannot
past,
use it in
present, and
speaking
perfect.
if they don't know the forms perfectly.
Yeah,
Even if they understand how it's made, if they hesitate when they need a word, if you hesitate for each word that you are saying, you will not be able to finish one sentence.
yeah.
So that's a very good example. And in general, vocabulary has to be learned really by heart. At least the most common words, because you cannot hesitate on each word. You cannot spend time to retrieve the information for each word.
Can be formula of tenses can be learned by heart.
Formula of tenses, like okay, to make a preterite, I need to add ed at the end. The thing is, in a conversation, can you take time to remember the formula and then apply it?
Yes, I think it is relevant as well, right?
Yeah, but the formula itself is not enough. You have to practice it as fast as possible because you need to automatize the creation of the tense.
Yeah, if we don't remember about the
Not just the
formula,
rule itself, but
yeah, formula.
be familiar enough with using that rule so that you don't spend time, oh, I need to take this, I put ed, and then, okay, I have my word, and then what is the next word in my sentence? You get my point? You need to, when you teach, you need to be very careful about the level of proficiency that you want from your students. Not just teaching a rule, okay, teaching a rule, understanding a rule, yeah, that's fine. But how they will use it. So,
Learned by heart.
what you need to learn by heart, the prerequisites for further learning. Any piece of knowledge that will be necessary for the next lesson. Things that you use often. Because you cannot hesitate when you are speaking in a language. Or in math, you use multiplications all the time, so you cannot hesitate with the multiplication tables. You have to know perfectly, because if you hesitate with the multiplications, you will not be able to solve an equation.
Agree.
Anything that you need to retrieve very fast. And Additionally, but it's not so important, cultural references, landmarks. You don't need to remember everything about history, maybe not all the dates of all the events, but at least some events that will serve as a reference point as a landmark to situate other events. So the teachers should be very careful about what they want the students learn by heart. In order, they don't want to waste time. Don't try to remember the results of an equation or anything that, or the reasoning, but very simple things that they absolutely need on a daily basis. So, I think we are clear about why we need to memorize and what sort of things we need to memorize. So now, how do we memorize effectively? Because it's a painful process. Maybe you remember the preparation of the exams. How did you prepare your exams?
For me,
How do you revise for your exams?
when I want to do by the exam,
And they forget everything, or maybe they remember just for the exam, and immediately after the exam, you ask a question.
How about the learners, types of learners?
Well, it's important that you read at some point, but it's clearly not enough. If you just read the same thing again and again, like 20 times in a row, you're wasting your time.
I think it's based on the learner talent, right? If they are good at reading and writing, so
if they are good at
that should
reading
be
with
better
the
for them,
intent
right?
of learning something. And not everybody. And in fact, there is more to that.
That is not a generalization, okay, for all that you assume. Right?
And there are better methods to memorize, much better methods. First, so there are a few principles that I've taken from a book that is called Make It Stick by Peter Brown, Redinger, and McDaniel. I strongly recommend you to read that book. It's easy to read. Lots of good tips.
Make it stick, right?
So I just summarize the most important things. Testing. You test yourself. You read. You hide. You ask a question. You try to retrieve what you have read. Because if you just read without testing, without trying to remember immediately, you will forget.
This is a method for
Yeah.
memorize, yeah?
A method to memorize. the principles, the basic principles that testing is one of the most important. How do you test yourself? We will see what sort of tricks you can use to test yourself. Spaced retrieval practice. When you try to remember things, don't do it only just after reading. And don't do it too many times in a row. Like, I try to remember all my lessons. I read all my papers 2 days before the exam. That's not the best way. It's better to anticipate, like 1 month in advance. You try to remember for 5 minutes. Then you let some time pass, like 1 hour, 5 more minutes, you try again. You test again after 1 hour. And then after 1 day. And then after 1 week. And that's how it will stick in your long-term memory. Not just a short-term memory to pass the exam the following day, but a long-term memory. You need to practice a lot, and it's better to get some time in between. How much time? It's difficult to say. At first, like 5 minutes, you wait for 1 hour, 5 minutes, and then when you are a little bit familiar, you leave 1 day in between, or maybe 1 week, and you try to see how much you can still remember after 1 week, and so on. So
retrieval practice.
You try to retrieve, but you space your practice. Instead of trying to do it like 4 sessions of 5 minutes are more effective than 1 big session of 2 hours. Interleaving problems. Well, that's a very simple. You clear your mind. After you have read your lesson, try to remember, then you let some time pass, but you clear your mind with another problem. And you see if after doing something different, you can still remember. Get it?
Yeah, get it.
So you alternate, for instance, your math lesson, your Khmer lesson, your math lesson, your Khmer lesson, and so on.
That's also doing the brain exercise. Like according to research in bilingualism, they said if we can speak more than 1 languages, we can switch from thinking in 1 language to another.
Yeah.
And that's also improve the overall memory according to the research.
It gives you a better understanding of the grammatical structures because they are not so obvious that.
Right. There's all the positive transfer. So the knowledge of the first language will influence the knowledge of the second language and vice versa.
Yeah.
And that's how our memory improve overall.
That will lead us to the next principle, elaboration, which is a word that they chose to say that you should make links with previous knowledge. You remember the schema theory of Piaget. New knowledge is integrated in a big schema that contains previous knowledge. So make links with things that you already know. Even if it's a little bit artificial. But try to find a retrieving path. You cannot learn pieces of knowledge independently. You have to connect them to something that you already know in your mind. And it's much easier if you already have a lot of knowledge. Like what you say, you already know a language, you learn 2 languages, 3 languages, and they help each other because you can connect to something.
There's the idea is that when we can master one thing well, we will be able to master another 10 things.
Yeah.
Miyamoto Musashi, he's the god of war in Japan, and he said, from one thing, know 10,000 things. So we believe that if we do one thing hard enough and good enough, and with that experience and knowledge will allow us to master the other thing or the other aspect
Sure.
quite easily.
Sure. And that's why it's difficult to learn a language that is very different from your own language, because you have no anchorage, no starting point to start making connection. And when you start to know more vocabulary, it makes sense immediately. The next principle is generation. You memorize better what you have created by yourself, the knowledge that you have created by yourself. It's not enough, but it's a good start. Reflection or metacognition, you reflect on what you have learned and how you have learned it. We will give you an example later on. And use mnemonics. You know, those little tips to remember things. My examples are mostly in French, but you know, when you have a sentence to remember in which order the planets are from the sun. Mon vieux théâtre me joue souvent une nouvelle pièce. Mercure, Vénus, Terre, Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, and so on. You know, you probably have that sort of things. But in fact, those tips to organize content, it's a kind of elaboration. You try to make links. Okay? So those are the main principles. Are you surprised with some of them?
Not really. But for the tips to organize content, it's supposed to be a linear thinking that will help us to organize the contents to be memorized, like the planets. Like if we mix up the planets, I think it would be hard. But if we organize it, and any time that we think about that planet, we try to think about it in a chronological order that would help us to memorize them a lot faster than not having the logical order.
But it's not necessarily, not everything has to be linear. And in fact, you should be careful about making too many things linear. Because if you need to know what is the third planet from the sun, and you have to recite, it can be difficult.
Just like
but it hurts.
2 by 2, 2 by 3, 2 by 4, 2 by 5.
But it's not a problem with the planets. But let's say you have something more complicated. You are learning your multiplication tables. Okay? You recite the table in the correct order. 1 by 2, 2. 2 by 2, 4. 3 by 2, 6. And so on. Okay, fine. But the problem is, in real life, you will never recite. In real life, you have to be able to give the answer immediately. 7 by 8.
56. 72.
Good. And you cannot hesitate. And you don't recite in your mind the entire table, because if you have to restart from the beginning, each time you need one result. I could add one principle: learn as you want to use it. Of course. So, and if you learn a lot, it will not be linear. It will be a web of interconnected knowledge. And you will have several paths to retrieve the information, not just one. Because if it's linear, you have to go step by step in order to get the information you want. All the time. And it takes a lot of energy. But you need to have several ways to retrieve alternative ways, and you will be able to find the information you need immediately.
But memorize number different from memorize word, especially language.
Not fundamentally. Why do you think so?
Because by experience, maybe my age already old, I learned Chinese, but the word difficult to remember.
You can associate numbers with all sorts of things. Generally, you associate with language as well. You learn to count in a specific language. For instance, one thing that is very clear, when you have to calculate something, you shift to your mother tongue, almost always. Can you calculate in English? Can you calculate in English? And that's a trick to know if someone is just very good at a foreign language or if it is his mother tongue.
Like me, my case, if I have to think, maybe 60% I will use Khmer to calculate and then I translate to English.
Yeah.
But sometimes 40% I calculate in English, my mind, use English to calculate.
Yeah.
Like 60-40, that's for me only. I'm not sure about the 2000. When you calculate the number, you use Khmer to think or you use English to
Khmer
calculate?
to sing, right? Khmer to sing first, okay.
Most of the time,
Extremely difficult.
Yes, it seems to be a big percentage, okay, I think.
In fact, it's not necessarily your mother tongue. It's a tongue in which you have learned how to count. But you see, it's very demanding for the mind to have both change the language and calculate at the same time. It's super difficult. So language is very important even for maths. But you can also associate your mathematical concept to images, or it's not necessarily just a word, it can be a situation, but you need to make a link with something that you already know. And when you teach the kids, you need to help them make connections with anything that they already know.
Language.
It doesn't matter if it's always the most logical thing, but at least make a connection because you need an access path to the information. A little bit like in a computer. If it's written on the hard drive but there is no access path, it's not, there is no repertoire, it's exactly as if it was erased from the hard drive.
Stan, the principle of good memorization by Peter C. Brown here has been implemented or experiment with the old people or
everything is based on experiments.
old people or young people, because
All sorts of people.
that seems to be a big difference between young people and old people, right, for the memory, I think. So what do you think?
No, what I think is, well, they don't really talk about old and young people in their book, but what I think about it, young kids can memorize much better, much spontaneously than adults.
Yeah, I think so.
They are much more flexibility in their mind. However, it's not the end of the story, because adults have one advantage. They don't have the same flexibility in mind, and they don't have the same motivation for learning and memorizing new things. But they have one advantage, is that they have much more previous knowledge that they can use.
Yeah.
So what the new information that they take, they can understand it faster.
Sure, but
And they can, if they want, make connections faster. But the thing is, it's also a matter of effort, the energy you spent memorizing. you know, the first things that you memorize are super useful when you're a kid. Like, let's say you're a kid, you learn the word milk. Wonderful, because now you say milk instead of crying. And suddenly your parents understand what you want. So it's super useful, just one word. But if you learn new words when you are very old, you already have most of the words that you need in daily life. So the benefit of learning a new word is much lower. So in terms of motivation, it's not the same. And also, you already have your mindset, a lot of things are already fixed and will not move much. So it might be difficult for adults to understand very new concepts that go against your previous schemas. So it's complicated. An adult who maintains his ability to learn by learning continuously will be wonderful. But if you stop, if you lose the momentum, it becomes much harder. Yeah. That's what we could say about memorizing new things. Motivation is not the same. The flexibility of the mind is not the same. And
so in short, this principle should be useful for the young people, I think.
Also, also because some of those principles are done spontaneously, are implemented spontaneously. I mean, in smart kids, they will spontaneously elaborate. When they want to learn something, they will try to make a connection with something else. But not everybody. There are some kids who don't make the connections easily and spontaneously. So you have to guide them. Reflection on how you learn. Some kids do it, but some don't.
Cannot.
Or do it very loosely. Spaced retrieval practice, it's not obvious because, like Harman said, I revised just 2 days before the exam, so it takes some discipline to do it. It's not something spontaneous. Most people don't do that, don't space. They just do it in one big session, revising just before the exam.
3-minute rule, okay, from soft skill.
And it's painful. Okay, so I propose you to practice a little bit, some memory games. If you want, please come. Come here.
A game of Kim.
Let's see if you have a good memory.
I already old man.
So, yeah, but who knows if you are the worst? So this game is very simple. I will show you some objects that are hidden. You will have like 90 seconds. I will put a timer.
Interesting.
1 minute, 30 seconds. So the game is very simple. You look at the object and you try to memorize the object. At the end, if you have a piece of paper, take a piece of paper. That will be easy. No, not that. Or you will try to make the list of all the objects. Okay? So don't write now. First step, you just observe. Okay.
Ai ra in không ai hả?
If you want.
I have written full icon now. Full icon. I got full icon, but I missed one.
Huh?
Run out of time or?
No, let's see. Continue if you think you can do more. But I think you are almost at the end of what you can find, what you can retrieve. If I give you more time, you will probably not be able to find more, unless maybe you discuss with the others. So,
I get more.
how many do you have?
Đọc
13.
13.
I'm
Not
not sure
bad.
whether it's correct or not.
But you're not sure. 10
Thành.
and
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
8.
À.
Yes, but
Let's
you mentioned
compare.
how many of some item,
Okay.
Oh.
Some item there.
You
which is interesting. We will talk
counted
about it.
numbers, well.
He counted the number.
Oh, maybe I might be right or wrong some.
So maybe some of the items are in several samples, so that's it.
Ồ, cái tùy mùi.
Oh, I forget this one.
Tùy.
Glue.
Is it glue?
Toothpaste.
It's not glue, it's toothpaste. So you can remove glue, it's wrong.
Okay, battery 3, 1, 2, 3, oh, 4.
4 batteries, not 3, 4. But 2 in the same pack.
Okay.
But
That
you-
was
you
tricky.
call only one, yeah? The
Ah.
accessory.
No, if you want to be
Nine.
accurate, you
Okay,
should.
9,
Oh,
1.
yeah.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
9, 1, key, okay, key 1. Oh, key 2.
Key. 2, but on the same.
A tool to open the bottle of the wine or some drink.
Yeah. And it doubles as.
You count only one.
It depends. It depends how
I-
specific you are.
I only 1, 2.
I miss this
oh,
one. I miss this one.
I miss this. I miss this. Only
Okay.
one,
Oh,
two,
I missed this one. I missed two of
one,
this one.
2, 3, 4,
Okay.
5,
So, my question now
6,
for you is:
7, 8, 9.
did you have a strategy to memorize the items? Apparently, Sawit had a strategy, at least a limited one. He counted the items that appeared several times. 2, 3, 4.
Okay, I
Comb.
can categorize. Okay.
1.
1. Okay, then.
Okay.
Knife 1. I can categorize the thing. Okay.
Okay, you can categorize the things.
Yeah.
For instance, you could categorize like this. And remember, in that category, items for
For me, it's
hygiene.
it's just random.
Yeah. But you have that sort of strategies to improve. Yeah, you could put that also because it's all about hygiene. You have all the batteries. You have school supplies, medicine. Okay. And apparently some items were a little bit more difficult. You hesitated with this one?
Yeah, I put a carrot part of a knife. I thought it's not a knife.
You hesitated because you didn't really recognize
Yeah.
the item. And it's important in order to memorize to be able to name things properly. If you cannot name the things, you will not be able to remember that they are here. Did you have this?
Yes.
Everybody?
Charger. No. Charger. I put it first. Charger here.
Maybe some people have different priorities. So, what we are doing right now, by explaining the strategies, it's what we call metacognition. Thinking about how we think. And it's very useful for the kids to make them explain how they reach the conclusion.
Oh, if I think I know the item that I use the most in my daily life. Like charger, I see them most of the time. I use them every day. I try it, and this one I also use them. I put it second.
But you are not familiar with this model of knife.
Yes.
Therefore, it was more difficult.
So in the random practice, I normally note down something that I use the most in my daily life.
Yep.
That's maybe one of the examples.
And so there are lots of different strategies to win this game. I'm not saying that one is better than the others. Some people categorize, and it's a very good way. Some people try to associate the object with a name, to name the object in their mind, and they repeat the name in their mind. Some try to take it as a picture, but it's not super easy. Other people will try to, for instance, find an order. Like here we have batteries.
For me, I just look around.
And some people, to avoid missing anything, they try to, going from left to right, or from top to bottom, and so on. So they have different paths to memorize. But the idea is that you try to put some order on the items in order to, if you want to memorize better.
I need for subject.
Categorizing. So it's very interesting to see how you do it. You are all relatively good memorizer. Not the best. Last time we did this with students of NGPRC. I think the best one had almost 20 items. I remember Malin was good at it, and she had a strategy. Those who have no strategy at all don't perform well. And so it's a very good game for young kids.
Put on the board and count the.
So we have illustrated some elements, making links with things you
Put on slide.
already know, naming things, associating the things with your daily life, counting the items. Those are very good strategies. The thing is,
Also include the bread as well.
if you want,
And I congratulate.
it doesn't matter. But
Memorize.
and some kids find strategies by themselves. But some really need a teacher or an adult to guide them
Yeah.
with that. So it's good when you practice this game with kids to debrief after, not just count the score, but make a few students explain how they manage to do it. And the same for the lessons that you teach to the students. Ask the best students to explain how they memorize their lesson. And you might find some surprising strategies sometimes. Because they will make connections that are different from the connections that the teacher has made. And you will see the big difference between the good students and the others is that they can make connection spontaneously. Okay, so that's one game. We have said one of the most important principles is to space repetition and to test. To test yourself. The thing is, how do you test yourself when you have your lesson? You have your notebook, how do you test yourself? Do you have a simple method to test yourself?
Read and close the book and then try to recall it.
Read, close, recall.
And recall it.
Yeah, that's one very good practice. Read, close, recall. But if it's for very specific things, you can also use different techniques. With computers, you have quizzes, all sorts of quizzes. There are several software and platforms that you can use to make that. You prepare your quiz with your very basic questions, and you can take the quiz several times. That's why ICT can be extremely useful for memorization. Generally, the softwares are not so good to train higher orders of thinking, but for memorization you have very practical things. So it's good if the teacher can prepare quizzes for the students. The advantage of quizzes is that you can repeat it again and again until it's perfectly memorized. And you can have a lot of software. Are you familiar with flashcards?
Of course. I used to teach young learner. We use flashcards to make the student remember the type of birds like flamingo, pigeon, sparrow.
Okay.
So we use flashcard a lot.
And the others, do you use flashcards in your teaching?
Not much.
Not much? Okay. So there are many ways to use flashcards, but it's, the principle is very simple. You have a question.
And then the answer at the back.
And the answer at the back, generally. By question, in fact, it can be different things. It can be the picture of an animal and the name of the animal as the answer. It can be not the best thing, but also useful. A word in English and a word in Khmer, and you can reverse, and so on. So in this case, a multiplication. I've taken the advanced deck because you are already good at multiplying. So let's practice with something a little bit
1 minute
more
break.
challenging.
Go to restroom first.
Really important.
And you're right. We could make a comment about it. Before you try to memorize something, make sure that you are in a good state, you are relaxed, and you don't have distraction. So, yeah, go to the bathroom.
To gather on the table. and then ask them to see all of them, and then they can flip, because one is the picture of the birds and another one is the words
Okay.
of that bird. So ask all students to take some time to remember.
Okay. You give them some time before
Right.
playing.
So all
That's
of
good
them,
thing.
around 6 or 7 students, they just stay around the table and they try to take a look. They say, oh, I remember this one, and they put it back. After everyone is ready, I collect all the flashcards, and then I will only show them the picture of the birds and let them say, what is that?
And you interrogate all the
Yes.
students at the same time.
Yes, and then I show anyone who could tell it faster, I give the card to the
Okay.
student.
So it's a
student get
competition.
to- Yes, a competition.
You do it as a competition.
Right.
That's a good way to practice. It's very effective and it's very motivating because with competition it's a very nice game. So let's say
91. 55. 104. No. 112.
hey, it's good.
Oh.
153. 143.
Oh, and calculating. It's difficult. $250. $260.
210. $75.
That one was fast.
117.
Oh,
105.
wow.
Good.
Impressive.
24.
Too simple for you.
130.
190.
Oh.
180.
$350.
Okay, you get it. You play like that for 3 minutes, 5 minutes. You take the card back
Good.
and you repeat the same exercise the following day. No need to try to be perfect at first. And with that sort of things, with enough practice, after maybe a few months, they will know the multiplication table perfectly.
The teacher can improve themselves as
Well,
well.
this one, it's the advanced one, but usually with primary school students,
Yeah, for
I
the
use only from
primary.
1 to 9. The basic multiplication tables, not 11, 25 or 15. I took it for you because you are adults. But it's not there are many ways, in fact, to use flashcards. You can also play against yourself with a timer. Or you set a timer and in pairs, and you try to answer as many cards as possible.
55. 300. 300. 310. $300.
You can set a rule also. If you want, you can pass.
Not 300 so much.
350.
350.
24.
So is it a good idea that
Answer.
the teacher explain the technique first, the technique how to
Sure.
calculate before
Sure.
playing the game?
You can explain the technique to
Student
calculate
pick
a special
the strategy and then they put the strategy
into practice.
The technique of calculation example 14 multiply with 25. First we need to multiply 25 with 10,
And then
250.
Yeah.
And 25 multiplied by 4 is 100. And 100 plus 250.
I have another strategy, which is to consider that 25 is a fourth of 100. So you go by 4.
By 4 is 100 and multiply with 10.
Yeah, but there are different ways to reach the result. But in any case, in terms of memorization, practicing like that every day a little bit, just 3 or 5 minutes can be extremely useful. And so you set 3 minutes on the timer. At the end, you count how many cards they have won, and that will be their success against themselves. With basic multiplication tables, with students in grade 4, the result was 50 cards in 3 minutes.
Oh, okay.
50 cards in 3 minutes with enough practice, which means that the kid was able to provide an answer, any answer, randomly every 3 seconds, which is pretty good. Now, it's just a matter of practice. At first, maybe the kid will have only 10 cards in 3 minutes. Not much. It's not a problem. Just try to improve next time. I think 50 was the cap. Difficult to go further than that. So, how to create flashcards is quite easy. There are just a few things to consider. You have a question and the answer. Flashcards are good if there is only one possible answer.
Yeah.
Because if there are several possible answers, it's complicated, it doesn't work well. But it can be adapted to any subject. That's the advantage. English, the word in Khmer, the translation in English. Or a picture and the word. For instance, it's just a matter of imagination, and it's easy to make, in fact. I put it on hard cardboard, but
the new word very important.
Okay, so.
but you just take a piece of normal paper, you cut in smaller pieces, you fold, you cut, and you ask the students to fill their flashcards by themselves.
Also.
Instead of taking notes in their notebooks for the vocabulary, ask them to write on small pieces of paper so that they can use in order to memorize. It takes the same time to write on small pieces of paper, but they can practice. And generally, you start with a small stack, like start with 10 cards, and every day in English, you add 5 more cards to your deck. 5 cards each lesson. You imagine how many cards you have at the end of the year? A lot.
Yeah.
And you shuffle the deck and you practice. Adding just a few more cards every time. Not too many because it's difficult, but 5 more cards every day if you practice regularly, it's very effective. And if you find that some words are already perfectly known, you remove them and you practice with those that are not totally perfect. Okay, no, this is too easy. Too easy. Too easy. Oh, I hesitate, so I keep it. I keep it easy. I keep, and so. Very simple.
Okay, so now thank you
That's
for
it.
your meaningful lesson. Okay.
I think that's enough for today. Practice. And it
For
will
the
be
next
fine.
day and next day.
Exactly, that's a point.
Practice make you better. Since no one perfect.
Yeah.